By 1929, the German economy had been stable for 5 years. Investment in industry had increasingly rose, inflation had gone, and prosperity was rising. This leads us on to looking at our next issue, the 1929 Wall Street crash. All of these things, all of this success had been dependent or reliant upon American loans which had been set out in the Dawes Plan in 1924. This plan was the work of Stresemann, who had died in 1929. He was the man who could be seen as someone who could be relied upon to steer Germany through any crisis. This became a huge problem in 1929 when the American stock market crashed and America recalled all of their loans. The Great Depression of 1929 is not to be confused with the hyperinflation crisis of 1923. Whilst they are both economic crises faced by the Weimar government, they are very different. In hyperinflation, the value of money goes down. People have lots and lots of money, but they can't afford anything because the prices of everything rise. In the Great Depression, there is no money. Unemployment rises dramatically. Banks recall loans, investment goes. So let's have a look at the key features of this crisis in a bit more detail. So as I said at the beginning, there had been 5 years of prosperity in Germany. This was because of American loans which had been invested into the economy, foreign investment had risen, and foreign powers had more faith in the German mark. Remember, the mark had been replaced in 1923 with the Rentenmark. Stresemann then died in October 1929. He was a key politician, somebody who the Germans relied upon and had faith in, and also other countries like France and Britain and America had faith in as well. Investment in industry continually went up at this time. However, when the American stock market crashed, bankers recalled their loans. Exports fell rapidly, which meant that factories had to close and unemployment rose. Many Germans then couldn't afford their rent and became homeless, and this led to a huge economic crisis. The consequences of the Great Depression in 1929 were severe for the government as America started to recall their loans. The world entered an economic crisis, and the period of 1924 to 1929, known as the Golden Era, was over. People turned to the government for solutions and lost faith when none appeared. Old anger and resentments that had been around before 1924 resurfaced, and people started to look to extremist parties on the right and the left to solve their problems. By 1933, 6 million people were unemployed in Germany. This date is significant because this is a date that Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. For ordinary people, the effects of the Depression were equally as severe. They lost their savings, they lost their jobs, and they were unable to buy food or pay rent. This meant that many Germans were homeless, wandering around the streets and living in desperate poverty. Violent clashes took place in the street, and it appeared then as though the government was starting to lose control.